Well, thank you. It's nice to be here and see so many familiar faces, but it's been a little while since I've talked on Common Terns, so I thought I'd give you an update on some of the things that have been happening along the St. Lawrence and other places as well. Oops. Okay. I'll figure it out. Okay, I'm going to talk about conservation and restoration of common terns in New York on the lower Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River. Really focus on the St. Lawrence, but also touch a little bit on Buffalo, some work we've done there, because we've learned some things that I think might be applicable to this area. This is a map of nesting locations in New York State. There are 3 primary places that common terns nest. You can see up on the St. Lawrence River. There are a lot of colonies all up and down the river. Sorry, Mike, that's a little bright. Carl Island here at Sandy Pond was a historic nesting location. Oneida Lake, and then on the Buffalo Niagara Frontier on both the Niagara River and on eastern Lake Erie. So I'll talk about mostly St. Lawrence with a little bit of Buffalo thrown in as well. Status and monitoring. Common terns are a threatened species in New York, and they're threatened for several different reasons. The primary reason is the expansion of ring-billed gulls, shown in the bottom picture there. There were probably about 50 to 60,000 nesting pairs of ring-billed gulls on the Great Lakes in 1950. The population peaked at just over about 950,000 recently, and it seems to be stable or declining slightly. We'll know the exact number when we do the next decadal Great Lakes census, which will probably be in a few years. They're done every 10 years. On the St. Lawrence, terns have been monitored annually since the mid-1980s. There's some scattered data from the late 70s. Most sites have been monitored since '78, which was part of winter navigation. That was the first year I came to the St. Lawrence to assist with those studies as an undergrad. And on both the St. Lawrence River and much of New York, common terns are restricted to artificial sites. They moved to those sites in the late 1970s. We think the population is down about 90% from historic levels, and we think that because there are some very large tern colonies here in the Thousand Islands that simply no longer exist. Productivity is limited by poor habitat, predation, in some cases human disturbance, and by weather. The tern is listed as a threatened, endangered, or extirpated species in all of the Great Lakes states. It's not listed in Ontario. Here's a shot of John Peach near one of the navigation cells. It's just downriver here near the TI Bridge. Historically, terns have nested at 68 sites on the St. Lawrence River in the last 25 years, over almost 100 miles of river, not quite. They started nesting on nav cells in the late 1970s, and that's because they were pushed off natural islands by the expansion of the ring-billed gull population. This year, or in 2017, we had 1,090 nests on the river from the lake to Messina. That's down about 200 nests from the year before. And we also lost 4 sites that they nested on in 2016. They didn't nest on in 2017, primarily due to changes in water levels, which is not a big deal. These things happen every now and then. The 2 natural islands that they're nesting on are right outside the door here. One is the Eagle Wings group, and the other island is Tid Island, both owned by TI Land Trust. High quality habitat is limited, and that's the fundamental problem we have with restoring common terns on the river. They nest, they also nest on breakwaters, water intakes, and power tower cribs. And I think I might have a picture of some of those sites in just a minute. So this is a threatened species. Like any management of a threatened species, we want to restore the populations to something higher than they are now. Maybe not what they were, but we'd like to increase the populations. The whole goal is to get them off the threatened species list. To do that, we need to increase the amount of nesting habitat. The upper left picture shows a little tiny crack in a concrete surface where a tern is trying to nest. That doesn't work so well. The bottom left picture shows an egg that is broken on coarse gravel. Lots of times those eggs are crushed during incubation and they don't hatch as well. Bottom right is a successful egg that hatched, and there's a small chick there, probably about 10 days old, and in the upper right, of course, is an adult. So the goal is to make more nests, make more eggs that hatch, get those chicks to grow up, migrate to Central and South America, come back to the river and breed. That's what we want to do. There are a lot of challenges in the tern conservation puzzle. If we start in the upper left, I've got loss of habitat. Again, that's primarily due to gulls. Up above, we've got some osprey. Who remembers where the first osprey nest was on the St. Lawrence? Anybody remember? The very first nest? I think it was Lone Brother Island, right by Hemlock Island there. Lone Brother Island Shoal and the old navigation structure that was there was probably the very first osprey nest. In 1990, Ontario Ministry put up 5 osprey poles. They were all occupied in the first year. Really quite dramatic. Now how many ospreys do we have? A couple? Yeah, they're everywhere. They're taking over the navigation cells that terns are nesting on. And we like ospreys. We have a lot more ospreys, at least not than terns, but a lot more osprey nesting sites than are available to terns. So we've been excluding ospreys in some cases, trying to put up poles, provide them with alternate locations rather than navigation cells. The upper right are geese. Canada geese now nest everywhere. There are a lot of them. They're competitors for nesting space with common terns. They also eat eggs and they trample eggs, so they're a problem. Bottom 2 right pictures there, great horned owl and mink, are really the 2 largest predators that common terns have. Great horned owls are really quite dense and widespread, and they do key in on these tern colonies and eat them. Mink as well, especially on natural islands. The nav cells don't seem to have a mink problem. Weather in the bottom center, a good cold rain, a cold night with wind and rain in early June can kill an awful lot of hatching tern chicks. June 5th, June 10th, you get a storm in that section during peak hatching period, and it's really quite depressing. Some of you here I know have done it, to go up on a navigation cell and find 40 or 50 dead chicks. It's really quite something. But if that same storm hit 2 weeks later, it'd probably have no effect at all. The chicks are larger, they can thermoregulate, they can survive a little rainstorm. The center picture is Salmon Island, just upstream of here and across the river there, just west of Kingston. That was 2016. Canadian Wildlife Service is doing a herring gull study there. The lower left picture is that island in 2017. Changing water levels is not that bad a thing. It's important, and sometimes these birds pick up and they move and they nest somewhere else. As a result of high water levels in 2017, Caspian terns nested for the first time in Buffalo Harbor. Some of their traditional nesting sites were underwater. They picked up and moved to Buffalo, and it did very, very well, and I'm hoping that that colony, in fact, remains and continues to be productive. So it's a good side. Tools in the toolbox. What kinds of things do we do to try and manage common terns? Start in the upper left there. Anyone know where that is? I assume many of you have been there. If you haven't, you should. That's the Eagle Wing group right out of Clayton here. That's the grid that's put up annually by Save the River and Tilt, and it's been highly successful at excluding gulls. You may remember in the old days that the Eagle Wing Islands were completely covered in gulls. There are hundreds and hundreds of gull nests there. This grid has been highly effective at excluding them and making habitat available for terns. The middle picture is a tern nesting raft. They're very successful in Toronto. We haven't had particularly good luck with them, but we're not ready to give up. We may try it again, and there may be some opportunities for something like that here in the Thousand Islands. The upper right picture, if you look carefully, and I won't blind you with my laser pointer, but if you look carefully at those chick shelters, there are 1 or 2 or 3 tern chicks under every one of those shelters. We provide these little plywood shelters to try and give them protection from sun and wind and rain and predators. And sometimes they work very, very well. Middle right picture are nest boxes. We built 38 nest boxes. This is on a Buffalo Harbor breakwater in 2005. Every single one had a nest scrape where a tern had made a little depression to lay eggs within 24 hours. 70% of them had eggs in 48 hours, at least one egg in a nest box. It was truly incredible. That's the kind of thing that you've seen that we've brought here. There's a box on Eagle Wings. There's a box on TID. If somebody lives near Cape Vincent, I've always wondered if the Cape Vincent breakwater might be a good place for a few tern nesting boxes. Bottom right is osprey. That's the chick that nested on the nav cell in the middle bottom on navigation cell 180. Getting osprey off of a navigation cell is very difficult to do, but we did manage to get it done. This cell here is probably one of the first ones we ever graveled, and it was thanks to David Duff and Susie Wood. That's actually Susie in the boat in that picture. We talked about terns one day. David called me up a week later and said, I've got a barge, I've got gravel, and I've got money to go do it, and we did. The bottom left is a monitoring camera, a little game camera, and you can see the geese in the background. The geese were there every single day, and they step on eggs. The tern in the foreground was trying to lay eggs and make a nest. The geese were constantly walking over and just trampling through everything. So geese can be a real issue. In the old days, we did backbreaking work. When I look at this slide, it just reminds me that my back hurts. This is again in Buffalo, and in the old days, we moved gravel with 5-gallon pails. Really just an extraordinary amount of work, and I'm so glad we're not doing it anymore. One year in Buffalo, I had a troop of Boy Scouts help, and they carried these pails and worked all morning. Lunch, they were still enthusiastic, but a little quieter, you know. Mid-afternoon, nobody was talking. They were exhausted. So we took them back to shore, and I thanked them all for their hard work, and I said, but you know, guys, last year, the Girl Scouts did it faster. The parents thought it was funny. The kids, not so much. But we took what we knew and we learned in these early years, and we upscaled it. We had an opportunity to upscale it as part of the relicensing of the St. Lawrence FDR Power Project of the New York Power Authority. So this was the Common Tern Habitat Improvement Project that started in 2005 here, and also 2009 for the Niagara Power Project. Big, giant cooperative effort with NYPA, DEC, Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps of Engineers, and St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation. And with that backing and that support, we upscaled everything dramatically. So on Lake St. Lawrence, that's a piece of the river between Ogdensburg and Messina, we've now improved 14 different nesting sites, 13 navigation cells, and 1 natural island with gravel, fencing, nest boxes, chick shelters, and so forth. So in the lower left, you can see that's a concrete structure. These concrete structures never produced any terns, but you add gravel and a little fencing, and you can produce some terns. This is Niagara. Talk about upscaling. This is a little different. This was 10,500 square feet of nesting space on 3 breakwaters that the Power Authority did as part of their relicensing effort in Niagara. This site is now the largest common tern colony in the Great Lakes. It's really quite extraordinary, quite something to see. So it's a steel containment frame on the outside with 6 inches of gravel, and it's been really quite successful. This is my crew. The top 2 pictures are my crew last year in the spring. We'll be back out there this year in the spring. And some of the gravel gets displaced by waves on the lake, and so we have to rake it back. We have to build interior partitions, put up perimeter fencing and internal fencing, and then put down the chick shelters. It's a big project, but it's very successful. And I love this lower left picture. If you look carefully, a number of those birds are all banded. So we band the chicks in the nest. It gives us an idea of productivity, how many chicks we're producing, gives us a measure of whether or not our efforts are successful. The birds migrate to Central and South America, probably come back at, well, we know some have come back at age 2, which is very unusual. That's an indication of an expanding population. Usually they come back at age 3 to nest. We've caught, the oldest bird we've ever caught was 18 and still incubating eggs. So if you have a site that's flooded out once every 20 years, no big deal. They've nested for a long time, for many, many years. The lower right, you can see just how active these places really are in the summer. It's quite extraordinary. Okay, so did it work? Has it worked at all? This is Ice Boom Cell C near the Ogdensburg-Prescott Bridge. If you cross that bridge, you can look upstream and see one and look downstream and see the other. And the upper left picture, this site was solid cement. There was nothing there. There's no perimeter fence. We fenced it, we graveled it, and you can see we started out fledging maybe 20 chicks a year, and now we've fledged 120 to well over 150 chicks per year. That's really pretty extraordinary. And these are simple methods. We're talking about plastic fence, gravel, some wooden partitions, and some chick shelters. It's pretty simple stuff, but dramatically successful. This is one of my rock star sites. I love this place. Another rock star site. We've got about 4 rock star sites. Eisenhower mooring cells, which got a lot of attention this fall. But we used to have this one graveled pretty well. We produced a lot of chicks here. We used to just fledge 3 chicks a year off it. The graph in the bottom right, you can see we fledged 350 chicks one year. We had 300 nests on this site. Sadly, in 2015, Seaway asked us to remove some of our gravel, to pull it back a little bit, make the nesting area much smaller. We did that, and now we've lost the site completely. So it had 302 nests on it. It has none now. I'd like to get that site back if we can. There are 2 other rockstar sites here, downstream a little bit near Chippewa Bay and Oak Point that Jim McGarry and Lynn Pohl have been taking care of. And in the last 2 decades, those 2 sites have really consistently produced a good, solid number of chicks. Those are the 2 sites that we graveled a long time ago and have kept monitoring and managing for quite a while. Here's a site that's not doing quite so well, but we'd like to get it working. This is 209 and 213 right here at the TI Bridge. You can see what it used to look like in the bottom left corner there. It was very coarse gravel. Had a few terns trying to nest there, but they never produced much because the gravel was just too coarse. We chartered a barge and a skid steer, and you can see we put up a lot of nice fine round pea gravel up there, and they're doing pretty well. Unfortunately, there's a great horned owl somewhere that comes in and gives us a hard time almost every year, but we have had some hints of success here. This is on our hit list to get up and running a little better than it is. You might know Chris Baird in the lower right picture there as well. We've done similar things on the Niagara River on potable water intakes. This was NRD money funded through Fish and Wildlife Service. Again, very simple. Barges, gravel. We returned in the fall of 2015 in the lower right 2 pictures there, and we welded rebar to the structure, strung our plastic fence around the perimeter, and this site is really working pretty well. We got 200 tern nests on this site. There's another one next to it. You can see all the vegetation. That's all white sweet clover. It's an alien invasive, and it's 2 meters tall. To me, that's, I'd disappear in there. And hiding in all that vegetation were all these steel trash racks from the original potable water intake. We had to cut up all the steel trash racks, haul them out of there, get some weed mat down, re-gravel the whole site, and it's also been pretty successful. There's an owl bothering this site as well, but we've got over 100 tern nests there. Ann Secord in the bottom right picture, and my friend Connie Adams and colleague from Region 9 DEC in Buffalo. She's the one, I think in one of the earlier slides, there's a little quote at the bottom that said, "It's hard to be a tern." That's her quote right there. Connie's the one that says, "It's really hard to be a tern." So again, has it worked? Here's what it looks like on the Niagara Frontier. We had something around 600 nests many years ago, and look at where we are now. We're at 2,300 nests. Now, I will say that part of that increase is because a site in Port Colborne, Ontario, on Lake Erie, was no longer being managed. They had a nice big long breakwater there. They added gravel to it, monitored and managed it for a long time. Ralph Morris's crew did that. When Ralph retired, not-for-profit tried to take it over. It failed, and about 1,000 nesting pairs came to Buffalo. So that's a good chunk of this increase here. On the St. Lawrence, I first started doing terns in 1990 and have been doing it every year since. And you can see that we've gone from a relatively small number of terns to a really good number of terns. We peaked at 1,552 nesting pairs on the river. We had a little bit of a setback in 2013 when for the very first time we had a peregrine falcon hitting some of the colonies. Hard to be mad at a peregrine falcon. That's pretty cool, Sometimes you have to share. So we also, unfortunately, a couple of sites would get hit during the day by a peregrine falcon and hit by an owl at night. So that was a pretty tough year to be a tern. We also had a little bit of a setback in 2017. That's partly because we lost that 300 nest colony, or most of that 300 nest colony, on one particular site up near Messina. And we also had pretty consistent great horned owl predation at a number of sites. But the birds are going to nest, and they're going to go somewhere. We're missing a lot of terns. There's, I know we have some Canadians here. There's a 1,000 pair nesting tern colony at Port Credit in Mississauga on the roof of a marina. So where's our green marine guy? Let's see here. But anyway, because terns are not listed in Ontario, they can exclude those terns, and they're doing that. They do have a scuttled laker at the entrance to the marina, and Canadian Wildlife Service, Dave Moore out of CCIW, is building nesting boxes on this laker that is sitting there as a breakwater, and the terns are taking to it. It's working pretty well. But we should have more terns. We know we're exporting terns, and the question is, where are they going? Because we've banded so many, we have an idea of where they're going. We are exporting terns off the St. Lawrence River. So one of these birds went to Ashland, Wisconsin. This bird was trapped on the nest 2 years in a row by Wisconsin DNR, incubating eggs. And it's wearing a unique individually numbered band, leg band, so we know exactly how old it is. We know where it was born and raised, right here on the St. Lawrence River. There's not a whole lot of seaway left past Ashland, Wisconsin. That's pretty cool. We've known for a long time that our birds go to Presque Isle Provincial Park across the lake and nest there. They also go to Oneida Lake, and they always go to Vermont. All right. And they also go to Lake Champlain. They nest in Lake Champlain quite a bit. The fascinating thing is one of our birds was trapped on the nest incubating eggs at Monomoy Island. And this is really, really unusual. It's thought that there's almost no gene flow between the coastal population and the inland Great Lakes population. This is the best record that says there is, but there probably isn't very much. So really an extraordinary record. We don't see it coming back the other way. At least we don't know of it happening, coming back the other way. The dotted lines are bands that have been read by spotting scope. Somebody in a blind with a lot more patience than I have will read a band with a spotting scope and report it, but we don't know that they were on eggs. So we can't confirm that that's a breeding record. There's a guy in Pennsylvania that developed a motion-triggered turntable with a perch. A tern lands on it, and it starts the turntable. He's got 2 digital cameras on either side, and he can read the bands with it. It's really quite creative. So you don't actually have to catch the bird at all. It's a brilliant idea, really brilliant idea. I'd love to put one out here for a month and just see how many bands we can get. You could figure out the average age structure of the population and really be neat. When we nest trap, and you know Chris Baird did his master's thesis on mercury in terns. So for that, we were plucking feathers. And of all the birds we trapped, the average age was 7 years old here on the St. Lawrence River. Okay, so what have we learned? We know that nest numbers and productivity are related to gravel. We need good nesting substrate, and we need a lot of nesting locations so they can move from place to place to avoid predation or water levels or whatever. Natural sites don't do so well without help, and that's your help out here on the Eagle Wings and Tidd Island. Sites with gravel do well. Perimeter fencing is better. Chick shelters, gravel, and perimeter fencing really works very well. So we know what to do. Now we just need to go do it. And that's where you can make a difference. If you want to help the Common Terns and restore them back to the St. Lawrence River, volunteer. Spend a day out on the Eagle Wings helping Save the River and Thousand Islands Land Trust put up the grid. It's an annual effort, and it's a lot of fun, and it works. Support existing efforts. Look for new colonies. There must be new colonies out there somewhere. We know that we found a new colony at the entrance to the Bateau Channel near Kingston. We found a Halliday Shoal north of Wolfe Island, and Goose Bay Rocks right here in Goose Bay just 2 years ago. So there are new sites out there. recheck old historic nesting sites. And if that old historic nesting site is no longer occupied because you built your cottage on it, go back to number 1 or number 2 above. But even small things help. You see the bottom right corner there? There's a puddle of water, a depression in the rock. That will drown tern eggs. Put a little milk jug of pea gravel in that depression, and the terns will nest successfully. So there's a lot you can do to help. And you'll be in good company. The number of volunteers that have helped with tern conservation is very long and distinguished. Stephanie Weiss on the upper left there. That is the first year we built that grid on the Eagle Wings in 2003. We had grids earlier, but that model is really state-of-the-art. It's been working really very well. In the middle are Jim and Judy, or excuse me, the Monroes, and I'm drawing a blank, Bill and Judy. Thank you. Bill and Judy have been monitoring Tidd Island for many, many years and done a really nice job there. John Peach in the upper right helps with a couple of the navigation cell sites. Jim McGarry in the bottom middle, Jim and Lynn have done wonderful work at navigation cells 156 and 180 for many, many years. And that effort has really been very, very successful. The bottom right, I think, is Grace Schultz and Kate, maybe. But there are a lot of people that have been involved in this work over the years, and you can volunteer if you like. Save the River staff, interns, Heidi, Sam, let's see, who am I forgetting? Ben and Grace have all worked hard on this project. Tilt staff, Jake and Brandon and Spencer and Susie have all helped out with terns over the years as well. So a lot of people involved. You can volunteer as well. In addition to Save the River and Tilt and the volunteers and members, I'd like to just recognize the support that we receive from state and federal agencies. DEC, the Power Authority, Fish and Wildlife, St. Lawrence Seaway, the Army Corps, and of course the people that own these islands as well. There are some islands that have been recently donated to the Thousand Islands Watershed Land Trust across the way in Lansdowne, and there's some real opportunities there perhaps to get terns reestablished as well. Together, we really are making a difference out there, and thank you all for your help.